Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Sheviis, Chapter 2, Halacha 4. Now, in Halacha 3, we were covering figs and work that could be done on figs before the Sheviis year, and then we were seeing what happens on the Sheviis year. Can you do something that's going to promote growth of it? The answer is no. On the Sheviis year, you have a prohibition of doing work that's going to be promoting growth of something on the seventh year. Now, it's going to get into the next logical thing about what happens if you're planting trees close to Sheviis. Now, this is a debate about planting regarding whether it's going to be, according to the Rishonim, whether it's going to be D'Rabbanan or it's going to be D'Oraita. Now, I want to point out that in the Vilna Goan's reading of Kalayim at the end of Halacha 8.1, the Yerushalmi is stating that planting trees is biblically forbidden in the seventh year. And also the Mara Fulda holds that position as well in that reading. Now, the Rambam and Rabbeinu Tam do not hold that position. The Rambam and Rabbeinu Tam hold that tree planting is not biblically forbidden during Sheviis. That before Sheviis, it's not biblically forbidden. Now, they agree that during the seventh year, planting trees is biblically forbidden. Okay, so the Rambam, Rabbeinu Tam, Vilna Goan, Mara Fulda, they all agree during the seventh year, and you can see that in Kalayim at the end of Halacha 8.1 in the Yerushalmi, that tree planting in the seventh year is biblically forbidden. Now, the question is, what happens about planting just before? Is that also going to be biblically forbidden, or is it not? Now, the Rambam and Rabbeinu Tam hold that it's forbidden D'Rabbanan. And the Rosh, in his reading in the Mishnah, is going to hold that it's also biblically forbidden to plant trees before Sheviis. Now, the Torah does not say explicitly that a prohibition is going to be there before on planting. But because the Torah does say that, according to the Rosh's reading of this, that grains, legumes, and the like, where it says, a field you shall not sow, in Leviticus 25:4, since the Torah does state that it's forbidden to prune trees in the Sheviis, it must certainly have prohibited planting as well. And why would that be? Because in Masechet Shabbos, you can see this in the Bavli 73b, it's going to consider pruning to be a toldah. Toldah is going to be a subcategory of the malacha of planting. So, according to the Rosh's point, if the toldah of planting, of pruning, is prohibited, then certainly the av of tree planting must be prohibited. That's the idea. Now, in the other opinion, Rabbeinu Tam and the Rambam and the Rosh are holding that they disagree, and they hold that tree planting in the Sheviis year is only D'Rabbanan. It's rabbinically prohibited. The idea, the logic behind it, is that since the halacha is going to follow the view of Rava in Bavli Moed Katan 2 and 3, page 2 and 3, that the biblical prohibition of Sheviis is going to apply only to avot and not to toldot. In other words, it's going to talk about this general work, but not the specific. So basically, any activity that's not explicitly prohibited in the Sheviis is not biblically prohibited. And therefore, when you're talking about pruning or you're talking about sowing, that is going to be biblically prohibited because it's actually written there in the Torah. And the tree planting is not going to be prohibited in there. So it would seem counterintuitive that you should have a toldah that should be forbidden where the av is permitted. And that's going to be, the question. It's going to be the question is going to be, is the Torah forbidding only forms of labor that can provide benefit in the Sheviis year in which they are performed? And that would mean that pruning would be prohibited, but tree planting whose benefit is not gained until many years later, when the tree grows large enough to grow fruit, that would be, that those fruit many years later are permitted, that wouldn't be forbidden. But keep in mind, the Rambam and Rabbeinu Tam are holding that tree planting is only rabbinically forbidden, and the idea is going to be whether this is going to be forbidden in this 30-day pre-Sheviis period. And there's a lot of readings, including the Chazan Ish's reading of the Rabbeinu Tam, that the Rabbeinu Tam is maintaining that the tree planting is d'Rabbanan in this 30-day period before Sheviis. And according to the Chazan Ish in 1720 in his reading of Rabbeinu Tam, that there is an agreement that it is biblically forbidden during Sheviis itself. And again, this echoes also the Vilna Goan. So the question is going to be, what about this labor that's coming before the Sheviis year? So this is a debate whether it's going to be d'Rabbanan or d'Oraita. In any case, you're not allowed to do it. And here's the rules. The Mishnah starts off, it says, one may not plant a tree and one may not layer a vine. What is layering a vine? That's going to be where you take a branch of the vine, you bend it into the ground, and then it takes root. And then after it takes root, you clip the vine to separate it from the main part of the tree, and it turns into a new vine. So that's how you make more grapevines easily and cheaply. Anyway, the Mishnah says one may not plant a tree, one may not layer a vine, and one may not graft a branch onto an existing tree. Now, this is going to be where you're talking about from one tree of the same species to another. And generally, on one species of the same tree to another, you're allowed to do it. But keep in mind in the laws of Kalayim that if you're grafting a different species onto a tree, it's always forbidden. It's always not allowed. So if you were to take a lemon tree and graft on the branches of an etrog tree, and then the fruit were to grow, would you have a halachic etrog? The answer is no, that's not an etrog anymore. If you had some sort of peach tree and you grafted on a pomegranate tree, and then this pomegranate branch grew pomegranates, do you have pomegranates? The answer is no, those are halachically not pomegranates anymore. In Masechet Kalayim, it talks about where the nature of the fruits start to change with the grafting. So it'll take some of the attributes of the main part and some of the attributes of the grafted part. So is that going to be like just being on an etrog tree by itself, where the main part of the trunk and the branches are etrogs and they produce etrogs? Those produce etrogs. Those are halachic etrogs. But grafted trees from a different species is always forbidden, always not allowed to do it. And if you have another question, right? What about if you have a fig tree, and this fig tree grows black figs only, and this other fig tree grows white figs only? Can you graft a branch from the black fig tree onto the white fig tree? The answer is yes. Yes, you can, because it's still a fig tree. And so that's the same kind. That kind of grafting is allowed. But if you were to have a fig tree and you were to graft it on to a lemon tree, would you be allowed to do that? The answer is no, because it's different species. And in the north, in Israel, most of the pear farms in the country are not kosher. So you, when the Mashiach comes and they reestablish the the Sanhedrin, they're going to have to tear up and burn the trees, because it's going to be where the base of the tree, the trunk of the tree, is going to be a quince, which is kind of like a hard apple, and they cut it and they put on a pear tree to get it to grow. Well, a quince and a pear are not the same species, so therefore it is a forbidden form of grafting. So the answer is, where in the Mishnah it's saying, and one may not graft a branch onto an existing tree before the 7th year. This is talking about from the same species. So this is going to be like the case where you're grafting from the fig tree that produces black figs onto the fig tree that produces white figs, so that it's not different species. The different species is always forbidden, but in the case of the same species, that is allowed. And in this case, one may not graft a branch onto an existing tree before the 7th year. Mishnah continues, it says, less than 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, and if one planted or layered or grafted a tree during this time, he must uproot it. So this is going to be a rabbinic requirement, and the Gemara is going to cite the reasons why. One of the reasons is going to be that, according to Halacha 2:1, that it's going to be clear that according to the Tana, that this requirement to uproot them is going to be even for a tree that was planted inadvertently. So one of the things is going to be to stop cheating. And you don't want to have people saying, oh, these trees that are here magically, and that they can figure out that they started in the 7th year, that they were all planted by a guy playing a game, claiming it's inadvertent growth and inadvertent plantings. And the law is that these inadvertent, tree plantings, because you can trace it back to the 7th year, that those trees are uprooted. And they uproot it because they want to make it clear that you're not going to get benefits from cheating and playing games. So they want to make sure that nobody can come along later, plant it, and claim that it was inadvertent. So they're trying to always, in the halacha, foreclose games like that. Rabbi Yehuda says in this Mishnah that any graft that does not take hold within 3 days will not subsequently take hold. So this is going to be a slight disagreement with the Tanna Kama by Rabbi Yehuda, where they're going to be basically trying to agree on how long does it take for a graft from the same species to the same species to take hold. And the question is going to be whether, if it doesn't take hold within 3 days, that it would not take hold at all, or would it take a longer period of time? And the Mishnah continues and says, Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Shimon says within 2 weeks. So what is this within 2 weeks? In other words, Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Shimon are holding that graftings, as well as planting and layering, may take hold up to 2 weeks after they've been made. And that's why they would be prohibiting grafting, like planting and layering, until 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah. So we learned in Mishnah 1:1 that in addition to the prohibition of plowing a field during Sheviis, there's also a biblical prohibition on doing so 30 days before Sheviis. Now, Rashi in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Bavli 9b, holds that the Torah prohibits not only the plowing in this period, but the planting as well. And since this Mishnah is teaching that causing a tree to take root within the 7th year is included in the prohibition of planting, it follows that causing a planting to take root during this 30-year period before Rosh Hashanah is also going to be forbidden. And so, Rashi's holding that these strictnesses on planting, grafting, and layering taught in the Mishnah, 30 days, 3 days, 2 weeks, they all begin before the 30-day pre-Sheviis period. So according to the Tanna Kama of this Mishnah, they're saying that one must plant his tree 60 days before Rosh Hashanah, 30 days because the Torah advances the Sheviis period on planting to 30 days before the 7th year, and another 30 days to ensure that the planting, layering, and grafting does not take root during the 30 days. So according to Rabbi Yudah, one is forbidden to plant 33 days before Rosh Hashanah. And according to Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon, it would be 44 days before Rosh Hashanah. That would be 30 days before plus 14. So according to Rashi, the Gemara is stating this explicitly in the Bavli in Rosh Hashanah 10b, where it says over there in the Bavli, Rav Nachman said in the name of Rabbi Bar Avua, according to one who says 30 days, one needs to plant 30 plus 30 days before Sheviis, and according to one who says 3 days, one needs to plant 3 days plus 30 days. That's not a universal opinion. The Rabbeinu Tam and also the Tosafot disputes that approach, and they're arguing that if in practice one cannot plant, lay, or graft more than 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, the Mishnah would not have stated it is forbidden to do so 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. So Rabbeinu Tam, in this reading of it, is maintaining that there's no prohibition to cause a plant to take hold in this 30-day period before Sheviis. So the only prohibition would be where it takes hold during Sheviis itself. That's going to be the issue. Now the Gemara was talking about it's talking about the Mishnah, which states one may not plant a tree and one may not graft and layer, and that's going to be less than 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, and if he planted it, he must uproot it. Now the Gemara is going to talk about the Mishnah's teaching about uprooting an illegally planted tree. Now we know that we have already covered what happens with illegally planted grapevines earlier, where the halacha is that they have to have a workspace of 4 amos between them. And in order for it to count as a vineyard, it has to have this. And the halacha is that you rip out the vines that are between the vines to make sure that you get at least 4 amos. So if you have to rip up a vine and it turns out to be a separation of 6 amos, then you have a 6 amos spacing. So then you've lost yield on your betsei of ground because you didn't do it right. In other words, if you have a spacing where it's going to be 3 amos each, and then the halacha is you have to rip up the middle one, then you created a 6 amos space between the last one and the first one, and instead of having a 4 amos space. So you've lost yield. And that's what happens when you have vines that are not done in the halacha. You end up, you have to rip up the tree to make sure that you have this halachic spacing, and that's going to supersede even getting the most yield out of the ground. So you might end up getting a lower yield by trying to crowd it together. So the Gemara talks about the Mishnah's teaching about uprooting an illegally planted tree, and the Gemara says, Rabbi Lazar says in the name of Rabbi Yosa bar Zimra, our Mishnah's ruling is an ordinary situation where it is not known when the planting took hold. The Mishnah is stating that if it was planted, layered, grafted within the time specified in the Mishnah, it must be uprooted. But if it is clear that it took root before Sheviis, it is permitted to leave it, and it need not be uprooted even if it was planted within these times. Well, this goes back to defending the position by Rashi, because if you're having to plant, in his reading of this from Bavli Rosh Hashanah 10b, if you're trying to plant a tree and you have to plant it 30 days before plus 30 days before, so really 60 days before Rosh Hashanah, well, you'll be able to see that this was not planted in the Sheviis year at all. It's going to be very, very clear, even after a year or two, that this was not planted in the 7th year, but rather was planted in the 6th year. And so that's going to be one way to look at it. The Mishnah stated that one may not plant a tree and one may not layer a vine, one may not graft a branch onto an existing tree before the 7th year. And the Gemara continues and says less than 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, and if one planted or layered or grafted a tree during this time, he must uproot it. That's what the Mishnah says. The Gemara is going to ask a question about this. It says, if he planted it and did not uproot the tree, what is the law regarding the fruit? In other words, what it's trying to ask is, are you allowed to eat this fruit, or is it going to be forbidden? Rabbi Kanievsky says about this that the rabbis decree that if the tree was not uprooted, then it's asking, is the fruit forbidden or is it not forbidden? And the Rosh Cirilio is saying that since a newly planted tree produces fruit in its first year, it will in any case be forbidden as orlah. This question is not specifically concerning the fruit that grows in the Sheviis year. If the fruit of an illegally planted tree is forbidden, then it's going to be forbidden throughout the entire lifetime of the tree. That's going to be the point. So the Gemara is going to ask, and it's going to answer. Here's the answer. The Gemara says, Rabbi Ba and Rabbi La were sitting in the city of Tzor. This is going to be Tyre in the north. And the Gemara says, a case came before them concerning the fruit of a tree that had been planted illegally before the 7th year and had not been uprooted. And Rabbi La ruled that its fruit should be poured out. In other words, it's saying that the fruit is forbidden, and that means that the fruit must be left for anyone to take. And that's going to be the law for all fruit growing in Sheviis, that the fruit of the tree is treated with Sheviis sanctity throughout the lifetime of the tree. And that's going to be where, the fruit is going to be completely forbidden, since it comes from a tree that should have been uprooted. So in other words, there's an element of sanctity to this, and the fruit is treated with Sheviis sanctity throughout the lifetime of the tree. That's what's so interesting about it. And that means that during Sheviis, a fruit tree, it's open for everybody to come and take. So this person can never have benefit from this fruit tree. That's basically what it says. Rabbi Ba is going to dissent with that. And Rabbi Ba says that I was not counted among them in the upper chamber when they ruled that the fruit is not permitted to be eaten. And they said, let us go and learn from others the law regarding the fruit. And they went out and they heard the following statements. Rabbi Yonah says in the name of Rabbi Yitzhak bar Tavli, who says in the name of Rabbi Lazar, we do not innovate new regulations on existing decrees. Rabbi Yosef says in the name of Rabbi Yitzhak bar Tavli, who says in the name of Rabbi Lazar, we do not add regulations to existing decrees. And it's enough that the sages required the illegally planted tree to be uprooted. In other words, there's no reason to extend the decree to prohibit the fruit. So basically, says the Pnei Moshe of this about Rabbi Ba, that although Rabbi Yonah and Rabbi Yosef use different terminology, the point of their statements is the same, that they had basically said that, that there has to be uprooted. And the sages often enacted decrees when they were in the upper floor of a building. That comes up a lot of times. You can see that in Ketubot 50b, Sanhedrin 74a. And the term about it being in the upper chamber, that's going to be an idiom where it's going to say, it really means that it's a rabbinic enactment. Okay, in other words, it's going to be a fence or some sort of derabanan thing that they're adding. It's not talking about a deraita thing. It never is. In the upper chamber, in the Gemara talk, it's always talking about a rabbinic enactment. And basically says Rabbi Kanievsky about this, that Rabbi Ba is saying that he did not vote in favor of extending the Mishnah's decree to prohibiting the fruit as well. So that's basically what it is. Now the Gemara is going to pose a question. It's going to say, if one planted a tree illegally before the 7th year and then died without uprooting it, may his son maintain it or not? In other words, the son did not do this illegal act. It was the father. So because the son didn't do it, would they require the son to uproot it? That's really going to be the question. It's a good question. Gemara is going to answer. Rabbi Yaakov bar Abaya of Bardalea taught in a brisa which stated, if he planted a tree illegally before the 7th year and died, his son is permitted to maintain it. Now, that's going to be also the way the Vilna Goan is understanding it. And the Mara Fulda points out about this that we must either amend this brisa or the Gemara's next statement that's coming up, because the two do not match. So the Vilna Goan amends it, and the Mara Fulda amends it, that his son is permitted to maintain it. Now comes the hard part on the next one. The Gemara is going to observe this ruling of the Baraisa is going to follow the view that, of the one who said that that the reason a person must uproot a tree he inadvertently planted on the 7th year is because of the suspicion that people would have, where people would violate the Sheviis restrictions on purpose and then claim it was accidental. And the Gemara is going to continue, is going to say, but according to the one who says that one must uproot something that was inadvertently planted in the 7th year on account of the calculation of the years of Orlah, it is only in the case of a father that people calculate the years of the tree, and in the case of the son, they do not calculate the years of the tree. That's the question. In other words, the calculation of the tree's age and the error that might result from it does not depend on who owns the tree. According to that opinion, even the son must uproot what is planted. Okay, so that's a little bit different than what we just read. And if you're going to read it like that, then even where the father dies and the son inherits the tree, it will be evident that that from the consumption of the fruit in the 3rd year after Sheviis, that the tree was going to be planted on Sheviis. In other words, by counting Orlah that in the 3rd year, if it wasn't planted on Orlah in the Sheviis year, you'd be able to eat it. And so because this tree is still being counted in the Orlah period of time, you can see that this is going to be forbidden. And by the way, when you have a tree, it's always going to be planted, within 30 days of Rosh Hashanah. It begins Orlah, the counting from Orlah, from Rosh Hashanah. And so that's how you calculate trees. You calculate it based on when is Rosh Hashanah and for Orlah. So the worry would be that that from the Orlah count, that people will calculate that this was planted either during the pre-Sheviis period or during Sheviis itself. So again, if you planted it 1 week before this tree, 1 week before Rosh Hashanah in the 6th year, this is going to count as the Rosh Hashanah taking hold of it and bringing it into the 7th year. Why would that be? Well, you might want to look at the root system. It might take a while for the root system to actually get going. And the root system didn't actually get going in the 6th year. If you're planting it in this pre-Sheviis period of time, what they're trying to say is that it took root and got going in the 7th year. And that's really the idea. Now, why would that be? There's going to be a law that comes up in many places about when does it start getting nutrition. This comes up in Masechet Orlah when they're talking about bending over the branches. And one of the criterion is going to be, when is this tree getting nutrition? So that they're talking about layering branches, and if you have a 10-year-old grapevine that you've layered into the ground, and now this new thing has started to get roots in the ground, and you cut the vine, the question is this new vine going to be counted as it already passed Orlah, or do you have to count again? The answer is that you have to count again, because this is where this new tree started to get nutrition by itself. It's not getting nutrition from the old tree anymore. So because of that, you have to count new years of Orlah. And so to here, if you're planting in this pre-Sheviis period of time, then you didn't have enough time for everything to take root. And it does take root and start to get nutrition in the 7th year. And that's why you can plant it in this odd period, in this period before Rosh Hashanah, and have it count as Rosh Hashanah, making it the year of Sheviis for when this tree is really planted. In other words, it wasn't really planted in the 6th year. It was planted in the 7th year. And you'll be able to detect that by the counting of Orlah. So the Gemara says that it was taught in a brisa, if one plants a tree or layers a vine or grafts a branch onto an existing tree 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, when Rosh Hashanah arrives, it is counted as a full year for him with regards to Orlah and Revai. And if it was planted at the end of the 6th year, he is permitted to maintain it in Sheviis. But if he planted it or layered it or grafted it less than 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, when Rosh Hashanah arrives, it is not counted as a full year. So in the Orlah or Revai cycles, it's going to be as if he planted it in the Sheviis year. And the Gemara says, and if he planted at the end of the 6th year, he's forbidden to maintain it in Sheviis. In other words, that because it did not take root before Rosh Hashanah, then it's going to be counted for Orlah in the 7th year. And that's why the Tanakhama are holding that it's going to take basically 30 days for a tree to take root. And so basically, if you're planting it only a couple of days before Rosh Hashanah, it's going to take root in the 7th year, and that's when it's going to start be pulling in nutrition. And that's why you have to plant it at least 30 days out, and according to the Rashi, at least 60 days out. So the Gemara continues and says, but the sages say the fruit of this planting are forbidden as Orlah until the 15th of Shvat of the 4th year. In other words, so you have 2 New Years, you have 1 New Year you have 4 New Years. You have 2 New Years being played out here. One is going to be for the Rosh Hashanah of the year, and one is going to be for the New Year of the trees. So this is the way it works. When you have a fruit that blossoms in the 4th year, between Rosh Hashanah and the 15th of Shvat, it will have the status of Orlah, and it will be forbidden forever. Okay, so that's going to be the idea. So that does sound surprising, but Gemara is going to ask, what's the source for this? In other words, since the Torah defined the law of Orlah to apply to the fruits of the first 3 years of a tree, why should a fruit that blossoms after Rosh Hashanah of the 4th year still be treated as Orlah? And the idea is that the years of a newly planted tree are going to be counted from Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so once Rosh Hashanah, once the 4th year fruit has arrived, basically the tree is legally 3 years old. Okay, and the Goan is going to answer what's going on here, that you can get this tree to basically be trapped. Okay, and Rabbi Yassa says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, after stating that the fruits of the tree's first 3 years are Orlah, the Torah states in the next verse, and in the 4th year. And this is teaching us that the fruit is sometimes forbidden even in the 4th year. And the Gemara is going to elaborate and say, and how do we learn this? And how do you learn this? And Rabbi Zera says, this verse is expounded together with the previous verse where it says, 3 years they shall be Orlah to you, they shall not be eaten. And in the 4th year, the word and from the phrase in the 4th year connects the beginning of the 2nd verse to the previous verse. And therefore, it's teaching that the prohibition stated in regard to the first 3 years extends sometimes in the 4th year as well. So Rabbi Kanievsky points out this cannot mean that the law of Orlah applies to the entire 4th year, because the Torah says that explicitly, that in the 4th year the fruit is sanctified to Hashem and eaten according to the laws of Revai. So accordingly, the phrase, says Rabbi Kanievsky, in the 4th year must be doing double duty. And, it's doing two things. One is it's teaching that the fruit that blossoms in the 4th year are sometimes treated as 3rd year fruits and sometimes treated as 4th year fruits. How so? That, says Rabbi Kanievsky, if the blossoms early in the 4th year between Rosh Hashanah and the 15th of Shvat, the fruit is going to be subject to the law of Orlah and forbidden for benefit. And if they blossom from the 15th of Shvat on, they are treated as Revai and they have to be eaten in Jerusalem or redeemed. So the reason for the 15th of Shvat being this cutoff date is gonna come up now. And basically, the Gemara is going to analyze the meaning of the Bryce's statement that the fruits of this planting are forbidden until the 15th of Shvat. So, the Gemara continues, says, Rabbi Ba Bar Mamal says in the presence of Rabbi Zera, the matter taught by the Bryce would seem to apply where one planted the tree 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, since in the case the 1st year counted toward Orlah is going to be less than a full year, the Torah waits until the 15th of Shvat, the 4th year, before lifting the Orlah prohibition from the tree. Gemara says, however, if one did not plant the tree 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, then come and see. A complete year has actually passed for him in the 1st year, so that by the time the tree blossoms after Rosh Hashanah of the 4th year, 3 full years have passed. And the Gemara says, and you will say this, that the fruits that blossom before the 15th of Shvat of the 4th year are Orlah. So rather, what this is saying, says the Vilna Goan, that, if he planted it less than 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, in this case, the days before Rosh Hashanah do not count as Orlah, so that the Orlah count is going to begin on Rosh Hashanah. So therefore, by Rosh Hashanah of the 4th year, the tree is going to be a full 3 years old. And if he planted it after Rosh Hashanah, but before the 15th of Shvat, a full 3 years will elapse before the 15th of Shvat of the 4th year. So in other words, you can detect that the tree, in the counting of the tree, is going to be planted illegally. And the case is that, illegally planted trees are supposed to be uprooted and destroyed. So it's not clear from the Brisa whether the statement is referring to both cases where you have a newly planted tree, regardless of how close to Rosh Hashanah was planted, or only in the case of a tree that's planted 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, where part of the year is counted as a full year. This is kind of what's getting debated here. So Rabbi Ba Bar Mamal is arguing that it's not logical to say that the Torah requires a tree to be subject to Orlah for more than 3 complete years, but it makes sense to say that the Orlah prohibition extends into the 4th year, which would be until the 15th of Shvat, only when the tree is less than 3 years. So in other words, that you'll be able to determine that it's an illegally planted tree based on the count. And the Gemara says that Rabbi Zera rejects Rabbi Ba Bar Mamal's argument. And Rabbi Zera says to Rabbi Ba Bar Mamal, if this is so, that the teaching of the verse applies only to a tree planted 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, then even if he planted it 30 days before Rosh Hashanah, the fruits should be forbidden until 30 days before Rosh Hashanah of the 4th year, and not until the 15th of Shvat. In other words, that basically what this is saying, says Rosh Cirilio to help explain it, is that if the tree should be forbidden for 3 full years, from 30 days before Rosh Hashanah of the 1st year until 30 days before Rosh Hashanah of the 4th year, so why would the prohibition of the 4th year be limited to the 15th of Shvat of the year? So really what he's doing, what Rabbi Zera is pointing out, is he's trying to demonstrate that the 3 full years required by the Torah for oral law are going to be legal years. It's not going to be where you're having the chronology, where you're counting in here this illegal part. So according to Rabbi Zera, when the Bryce is talking about the rule where it's talking about the fruits of the planting, that it's doing the count based upon how long this was legally planted. So we're talking about legal years. And so if part of it was planted, say, this tree was planted, say, 15 days before Rosh Hashanah, well, those are 15 illegal days, and they should not count at all in the calculation of the age of the tree. So that's another way to look at it. And the Gemara is now asking, it says, what now is the reason that the fruits are forbidden until the 15th of Shvat? And basically, what they're asking is, they're basically saying that they're trying to limit the Bryce's ruling to trees planted 30 days or more before Rosh Hashanah. And Rabbi Zera is presenting that what do you do with this tree? Basically, they're saying, that, why should the Torah treat oral law fruit from a tree that is more than, 3 years old, and that you have this like error in the chronological age of the tree because it was planted illegally? What do you do with it? And the Gemara says that Rabbi Mana says, since this new tree is standing within the year of trees when it completes the 3rd year, it is required to complete its 3rd year as a mature tree rather than as a sapling. So the Mara Fulda is going to explain it like this. And he's going to say by the time of the planting, it had completed 3 years. It's no longer going to be considered a sapling. It's going to be considered a mature tree. And the Gemara says that although the new year for saplings begins on Rosh Hashanah, the new year for mature trees begins on the 15th of Shvat. This, by the way, is in a Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah 1:1. And the Gemara says that we derive from the verse that it's teaching that when a newly planted tree finishes the 3rd year, its legal year does not end on Rosh Hashanah, but extends until the 15th of Shvat. And that's going to be the new year for mature trees. And so for this reason, says the Mara Fulda, that even if the tree has completed 3 chronological years, its fruit is still subject to oral law until the 15th of Shvat, when he completes its 3rd legal year as a mature tree. So according to this explanation, Rabbi Mana is upholding Rabbi Zera's view, and the Gemara is concluding that, with Rabbi Zera's position, that the extension of the oral law status until the 15th of Shvat of the 4th year applies to all trees regardless of when they were planted. And that's going to be the idea. In other words, that that you're going to have, when you're picking the fruit, okay, for after having it grown 4 years, are you going to be picking it as a sapling? No, you're not allowed to pick it as a sapling. You have to pick it as a mature tree. But a mature tree doesn't happen until the 15th of Shvat, because that's the new year for trees. That's when saplings turn into mature trees. And you're not allowed to pick the fruit from a sapling in the 4th year. So after Rosh Hashanah, up until Shvat, even though it's been the 4th year in the chronology, where it's past 4 years with Rosh Hashanah, you're not allowed to pick it and use it until the 15th of Shvat, because that's going to be when it has the status of a mature tree, and that's when you're going to go and pick it. Now, what about for the illegal planting? Because that's what we've been talking about. Well, you still have to count that out. And so you can have a case where if you've planted it in the, say 15 days, you planted this tree, say 15 days before the Rosh Hashanah, okay, basically you're going to be stuck with this fruit where you can't use this fruit. It's going to be obvious to everybody because it's going to be basically a year and a half later on when the fruit would be, clear. So everybody else is going to be that planted, say, in the 6th year legally, okay, they're going to be able to use this fruit more than a year early. And everybody's going to see these illegally planted trees that you still can't use the fruit. But it's not that you just can't use the fruit. It's obvious for how long you can't use the fruit. It's not just that you can't use the fruit like 2 or 3 weeks later, until 2 or 3 weeks later. You can't use this fruit for more than a year, and not just more than a year from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, but actually to when the count of the New Year for the trees comes, which is going to be in Shvat, the 15th of Shvat. And that's going to be where it completes the legal year as a mature tree. And so what do you do with these illegally planted trees? You have to uproot them. And it becomes obvious in the count where it's going to be illegal. So you're not allowed to have benefit from orlah, fruit. You're not allowed to have any benefit from it at all. So what is this trying to do? All of this complicated conversation is trying to teach you that, hey, this guy, okay, he's not using his orlah fruit, and let's say he's saying, oh, these trees are inadvertently planted, and I didn't mean to plant them. And he's not taking orlah. He's saying, look how religious I am. I didn't plant these on purpose. Okay, well, you still can't take orlah, and they're trying to teach you a roadmap on how to detect illegally planted trees based on the counting on the back end of the fruit, because he's not going to be able to take the fruit early when everybody else takes the fruit. The 6-year trees are going to be picked about a year and a half earlier than this guy who planted illegally. He's not going to be able to pick the fruit for about a year and a half after everybody else. So you'll know this is an illegal tree, and you'll be able to uproot it. How amazing is Torah? In other words, this is teaching you a tool in order to detect illegally planted trees based on the other end, based on the fruit. In other words, that it's very hard to determine this sapling here is this age, but in the counting of the fruit, here's how you determine whether this is illegally planted, whether on accident or not. And that's what it's trying to do. And that's the cleverness of Torah. Have a great day.